Hello YouTube community, my name is the Jacob13. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So one of the things that I've been meaning to do for quite a while now is talk more wrestling. Things that I enjoy doing often include the video game stuff, the wrestling stuff, reading books and all that. And I've mentioned a few of those things recently in episodes of Mechachondriac, for example, in my first update video of this year, things of that nature. And so what I'm going to do is talk about AEW and what it's been doing recently. Now, what I wanted to do originally was have an AEW side-by-side comparison with NXT and see what they do each week, compare the two, have sort of like a little graded section of like which episode did better than the other one, and if the ratings actually like matched up with that, as in how many people watched them that month, or that week rather. And I had basically started that as a thing that I was going to do back in sometime around like October, November-ish probably, and never really got around to actually uploading a video of it. As time went on, I stopped watching NXT as much, and I continued watching AEW. So I decided, because I'm not really watching NXT that much, I don't feel like putting in effort into watching the show if I'm not going to enjoy watching the show. I'm just going to talk about AEW, what they do on Dark, on Dynamite, and if they have a pay-per-view like they do this week, talking about that, giving a little bit of predictions, and then once it's happened, telling you how I thought that it went, and giving each little segment an individual little grade, as they say in Cultaholics episodes of Graded. So one of the things that you'll notice is that my presentation style for this is going to at least start off very similar to how Graded does it, and how Ups and Downs does it. Up, Down, Down is a completely different channel, unrelated to what I was talking about. But Cultaholic and What Culture really got me into this kind of concept and wanting to do it. And they're the reason why I started trying to figure out how much I enjoyed the show each time, instead of just watching it passively. So, without further ado, let's get into a little bit of what I think about what happened on Dark and Dynamite this week. And then I'll give you guys predictions for Double or Nothing, see what I think about that as well. So, starting off with Dark. I watched the episode as a premiere. Typically I don't do that, but this time around, because I saw it right before it happened, as in like I saw the premiere thing show up before it began at 7 o'clock, I decided to watch it this time around. I think that's what started me wanting to bring this back as a concept that I had thought of and actually doing it. And it just so happens that Double or Nothing is also this weekend, so everything sort of worked out in the end. So when I first started watching it this week, the audio was a little bit off during the premiere, and I think part of it was my end. I don't quite know exactly what, because once I refreshed it, it fixed. But yeah, that was a thing that I noticed and was afraid that was going to be a problem throughout, where I'd have to watch it with about like a 5-second delay between video and audio. I have no clue what happened there, but simply a thing that happened. So the show started off this week with Hikaru Shida versus Danny Jordan. Now, I recorded about 3 hours of me talking about this show and Dynamite and my predictions last night. I'm not going to do the same time this way. I'm not going to do the same way this time and have it go that long. So I'll try to keep these a little bit brief in terms of my thoughts on it. But basically, Shida had, throughout this match, a lot of really humorous moments where she was saying funny things and adding a little bit of comedy to the spots. There was one point when they had basically zoomed in on Shida, and she was like, "Stay home, stay safe, I keep fighting." I thought that was really good. So there was a lot of comedy mixed in with the hard-hitting style that we've known to see from Hikaru Shida. The match really was going to be a squash match from start to finish. That's kind of what we've seen recently on Dynamite with these enhancement talents. All of them have been very good. I've been very pleasantly surprised with what they've done, not in terms of being able to put over the obviously well-named people that we've seen and come to love, like Hikaru Shida, like Marco Stunt, like QT Marshall, etc., from this episode. But they've also made ways to like make it their own characters get over as well, while still losing and doing so valiantly. I think that that's been a very good thing. But because this was a squash match, one of my main characteristics of grading squash matches is that I don't like to do anything above a C+ as like the maximum grade for that, and I typically like to keep it around the C grade, just so that it passes technically if you're looking at it from a grading standpoint in school, but it's not like better than the passing grade. It's not like the best thing I've ever seen. It's not amazing. My grading system is a little bit skewed to the C's and B's territory typically, because there's not been many things that I've seen that I've absolutely hated, so I don't put it in the F category. There's not been things that I think have done worse than average or worse than what they needed to do, so there's not been a lot of it in the D category from what I've done. But as we continue on, you'll see that oftentimes it's very difficult to get an A, very difficult to get an F. B's and D's are probably a little bit more common in comparison to each other, and C's are the more likely of all of these types of grades. So it sort of like has a bit of a bell curve look to it. But yeah, so this is a C+. Thought it was a fairly decent showing between the two of them. A lot of really good moves. The Falcon Arrow looks amazing as always. She does the deal, gets the win with that. And since no one kicks out of the Falcon Arrow. And it was just one of those things where, like, I get what they were going for. Hikaru Shida got the win. She got a well-deserved win. But it was a squash match. Can't really do much more about that. Can't say much more about that than C+. Next match was Clutch Adams versus QT Marshall, and a lot of it was the same. We knew that QT Marshall was going to win. Clutch really didn't put up as much of a fight as I would have liked to have seen in a match like this, but Clutch is still pretty good. I think he did a decent job throughout this match. He's impressed me in the couple of times that I've seen him at being an insufferable heel, and his style in this match kind of reminds me of like a Chris Masters back when he was in the Masters of Cool with Carlito. Has a sort of similar style, maybe a bit less strength based and more heelish tactics based. But yeah, that was pretty good. Prior to this match and throughout the rest of Dynamite, they were doing voiceovers prior to the matches and like showing off what's going to happen. I think that was done poorly. It didn't sound like the greatest audio quality. So I did mark a little bit of points off for the overall grade from that because it wasn't particularly appealing, and it sort of took me out of the action every time that it happened. There was one move in particular that I want to stress about this match though, and that Clutch did a like Saito suplex into a wheelbarrow facebuster. Sorry, let me try that again. Started with a Saito suplex and turned that into a wheelbarrow facebuster. It was a really good move. I thought that it looked amazing, very devastating looking too. QT sold it very well, but Clutch Adams did a nice job impressing me with that move alone. I've seen better from him in the match before that I saw of his, but overall, thought it was a pretty decent match. C+ grading once again. QT has a new finishing move. He did a lot of cool stuff in this match, but the finishing move was the main attraction of it, I think. Him having the conversation with DDP on the road to probably sparked him doing this cutter, which kind of starts from like a neckbreaker position, then goes into the cutter. It reminds me of like a reverse twist of fate, but instead of having the guy's head under your armpit, you have them in the neckbreaker position, like you're about to fall away or whatever. So that's pretty neat. Then there was Jason Cade versus Marco Stunt. Stunt began the match, or began the contest, I guess, basically taking his sweet time, getting ready for it, and Cade sort of did like a come on, hurry up motion. I thought that was a very nice little touch there. The amount of like comedy throughout the AEW Dark, this episode and episodes prior, was really good. I very much enjoy that. But the match, of course, it was basically a glorified, more or less a glorified squash match. We knew that Marco Stunt was likely not going to lose because Jason Cade hasn't really proven to be a winner just yet. And because we know the sort of situation that's going on right now, that there are more enhancement talents than they are actual signees, we kind of get the feeling. But Marco does such a good job of making it believable that anyone could beat him at any time, or that he could beat almost anyone at any time as well, with the exception of people like Brody Lee or Lance Archer, obviously. Even when he goes up against MJF on Dynamite, which I'll get to later, it seems like he has the possibility of finding ways around it and possibly getting the win, even though in your heart of hearts you know that when he goes up against the bigger names, he's typically not going to win unless he has somebody in his corner to help him out, which I think is a very good starting point for Marco Stunt's character, and over time they can build it up so that he can be more like a Rey Mysterio character, where it's clear that he has the possibility of just getting destroyed by somebody like Big Show, but he could still beat him, that kind of thing. But yeah, Marco Stunt has a really nice uppercut and ear strike that he's been using. Kind of reminds me of like a Shining Wizard, and I love watching that. He's used that a couple of times. He ended this match with another really neat move. He took Cade from like the second rope and gave him a Razor's Edge, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. Then he did a 450, and I was like, that's a nice show of power and of his agility. I think that's pretty neat. I'm glad that they're really starting to give him a bit of a chance to shine in other ways than just being a punching bag and being thrown around like a rag doll, which is still one of the things that I think he excels at. His selling is amazing. But yeah, so a pretty good match. I'm going to give it a B minus. I tried not to give it too high of a grade because, again, it was a glorified squash match, but because it's Marco Stunt, because he has the ability to make it more believable that his opponent could win, I figured it deserved at least that little bit of a bump up above the typical C+ grade of the best types of squash matches, just because of the believability aspect of it. So it got to be a minus. The next match was Jimmy Havoc and Kip Sabian versus Musa and Lee Johnson. Now, while I know that Musa and Lee Johnson have also been the enhancement talents, I've been really surprised and impressed with their matches. Them, Alan Angels, Shug D, and Sean Dean have really impressed me, all of them. Everyone else who's been there has also shined and done nice things, but Musa, Lee Johnson, Alan Angels, Shug D, and Sean Dean are the ones that were really standouts to me, and I would love to see them come back in some capacity, especially Alan Angels. I think that he has a good mid-card to eventual upper card when he finds his footing within this industry, and could do very well in AEW. But regardless of that, the match starts off, surprisingly enough, with a little bit of British strong style and typical like catch-as-catch-can wrestling instead of the high-flying luchador style that we're used to from these types of matches nowadays. Most tag matches in AEW are more lucha style. You occasionally have the more Joshi style when it's women's wrestling, but for the most part, you don't see the British catch-as-catch-can style of wrestling beginning off. But Kip Sabian did a very good job of beginning the match against Lee Johnson with that. And then he tags in Jimmy Havoc, and it goes downhill from there for Lee Johnson and Musa. Lee Johnson comes out to Enough Is Enough by these Wolves, and for that he's always earned my support, so I really like that. I couldn't quite pick out what it was when I first heard it, but I knew that I recognized it and eventually found it like 2 or 3 weeks after the first time I saw him. There was a lot of comedy again in this match, something like when Havoc was doing all the beating down and all that, he was like, wait, time to go to wrestling now, yeah? And then he just like throws an amazing stiff forearm, knocking Musa out. Very good stuff like that. There's also some good heel work throughout this match. Fish hooks behind the back of the referee by like guarding yourself so he can't see it. Low blows behind the ref's back. Eye pokes, that kind of stuff. It was really good. And I think that Havoc and Sabian have a lot of potential together. I just would like to see it come to fruition sooner rather than later, because I'm starting to get to the feeling of like, well, where is this heading? I don't quite see the path forward just yet. But we'll see. The match ends with an acid rainmaker and a go-home driver, which is basically just a fisherman's DDT. I don't know if that's what he calls it in AEW, but that's what it's known on his wiki page that I found. I try to make sure that I get some of the moves right when I talk about this kind of stuff. So it was a decent match, again, because it's Lee Johnson and Musa. I prefer them, and I don't think that I see them as much as a squash match. I think that they have the possibility to win, even though they haven't thus far. So in my review of the match, that is also taken into account. If I don't think of it as, okay, well, they're obviously going to lose, and I have the ability to see them as winning instead of it's, okay, this is definitely a squash match, I typically grade a little bit higher. This one gets a B grade for that exact reason. And it's also because I don't want to grade the show as just down the board C's and C pluses, because it's mostly squash matches right now. So it's AEW Dark. You have to find some light within the matches. And while this also seems to be a little bit, unfair, I guess, to matches such as Clutch Adams versus QT Marshall or Hikaru Shida versus Danny Jordan, I think that overall my enjoyment of it was marked as well in these match grades. I definitely think that this tag team match was much better than the match with Marco Stunt, and I think that the Marco Stunt match was better than the QT Marshall or Hikaru Shida matches. So I tried my best to reflect that as well. The next match was Sean Dean versus Ray Phoenix. Again, Sean Dean's really impressed me. I've really liked his stuff. However, Ray Phoenix is Ray Phoenix. I don't see him losing to somebody like Sean Dean, sadly. Sean Dean being so fresh into the business, and Ray Phoenix being practically a living legend at this point with the amount of stuff that he's done, can do, and will eventually go on to do. I see him being in some Hall of Fames down the line. He's just an amazing wrestler. I hope his career is a very long one, knock on wood, obviously. But Sean Dean does do a very good job. He hits a Gamangiri, and then he goes for like a Tobe Konhiro, and it looks like he misses it. I feel like he like banged his legs up against the barricade. There was a lot of that happening this week, and I got very worried and concerned for a lot of the people that were doing these kinds of stunts. I'll get more into that with the Dynamite review. But yeah, the match was overall pretty good. Dean caught him into an amazing Tiger Driver. He like caught I think it was a body splash that Phoenix was going for. Put him into a Tiger Driver. It was really good. But Phoenix, of course, throughout the entire match was doing his joking around stuff that he sometimes does in his house matches, which I think is a lot of what Dark has become recently, is showcasing it like it was a house match and trying to add in the bit of comedy that people can have, so that you don't take yourself too seriously, but you're also not like degrading the sport any. I think that that's a very good combination that they've gone for, of being able to let the people express themselves in ways that aren't just I'm a strong manly man or strong womanly woman who can beat the crap out of you and win the match kind of stuff. You can also have a little bit of jawing here and there, cutting promos in the middle of the ring against your opponent, and that's what Phoenix does. He's basically like, hit me harder, you know, I know you could put on more pepper than that, and then he just knocks him out eventually. Hits him with the Black Fire Driver, which is his spin out muscle buster basically, or muscle buster into a Michinoku Driver. Very good move. The match overall very good, but again, I didn't see Phoenix losing at any point, so C+ is the grade, because again, it's a squash match. Very good one nonetheless. And I could consider giving it more points due to the fact that I enjoyed this match probably as much as I did the tag team match. However, I knew the result of this much quicker and much more sure. I was much more sure of that decision, so C+ is the best grade that I can give it based on my criteria of how I grade these types of matches. The next match was Luther versus John Cruz, which was, in my opinion, one of my least favorite matches on the card. Luther does some pretty good character development throughout this. He has an insane clothesline. He does some eye gouging. He does some fish hooking. He's yelling. He's talking to his hand. I think that his character work is pretty decent. I think that he does a little bit too much sometimes at points, but I get what he's going for. I kind of can see it, and I like it in terms of like AEW Dark stuff. I wouldn't want to see it on Dynamite anytime soon. I want to see him finding more of his way in the actual wrestling with people. I know he's getting up there in age and is probably, you know, had his best matches behind him if he ever had any good matches. I've never seen this stuff before, but what I've seen thus far has not really impressed me in terms of in-ring stuff. He does have a neat finishing move. It's basically like a camel eye hook clutch is the best way I can put it. And he ends up winning the match with that. Luther was never really going to lose this match. John Cruz never put him in any jeopardy. I did kind of like the character development in this, so I did save it for being the worst possible grade, but I'm not going to give it the best possible grade, so I gave this one a C. Again, it was another squash match, and because I wasn't a big fan of Luther's style in the ring, I don't think it was particularly good. I had to give it a lower grade. The next match was my least favorite match on the card. I really lost interest in it, and it's a shame because all the people involved in it were really good. It was Private Party versus Ryan Rembrandt and Mike Reed. There was a lot of botches here and there. It was a very messy match overall. I guess because three of the members are sort of youngish in terms of wrestling years, so I think that there's some miscommunications and stuff. They're not really knowing how to work with each other just yet. I've seen better from all four men, so it just wasn't a match for me. I think that it could have been pretty good if I paid attention to it and gave it a bit more chances, but I've gotten to the point where anytime I see a lot of botches in a match, I can typically get thrown out of it. And for whatever reason, the chemistry between these guys just wasn't enough for me to really enjoy it. So I give this match a D. Wasn't the worst match I've ever seen, wasn't the best, but was most certainly on the lower end of squash matches, because Private Party was never in any jeopardy of losing this match either. The next match was Alan Angels versus Sammy Guevara, and Alan Angels is probably becoming one of my favorite wrestlers, not just as an enhancement talent, but just as in general. I would like to see more from him. He has always been really unique in the stuff that I've seen thus far. In his match against Kenny Omega, Kenny was standing on the apron, like the skirt for the mat, and he basically just like tugged that out from underneath him. I thought that was brilliant. His match against Phoenix also was very good. And this match against Sammy Guevara was no worse. It was also a very, very good match. I thought this was the main event going into it, and sadly was mistaken. But this would have been probably a better main event, in my opinion. Not to say that the other one was not as good as a match, but I think that Alan Angels deserves main event slot on AEW Dark. I think he's earned that spot with his matches against Phoenix and Omega. But this was a pretty decent match. A lot of joking. This entire show was very jokey and comedy related, while still having the hard hitting stuff that we've come to know and love from them, and occasional lucha spots as well. There was a lot of good momentum being built by Angels until he jumped off. I think he was doing a springboard of some sort and got hit with an anti-air knee strike that just floored him. And Sammy, for the most part, continued to win the match from that point on. There was a really decent scene near the end of it where there was like an exchanging of strikes between the two, and it seemed like they were both well matched in that. That made me think that, these guys have big designs for Angels if they ever bring him back, or if he's like becomes a main part of the roster. I really like Angels. I think he's got a lot of potential, and he's probably my favorite of the options that they've had. Again, Shug D is pretty high up there too. I liked him a lot. I think that he has a lot of good character development to do with his stuff with Chris Jericho. The vignettes that they did before his match was very good. As a wrestler, I really liked what I saw. I haven't seen much from most of these people, but everything that I've seen from all of them was pretty good. But Angels is my guy from all that I've seen thus far. I also noticed that Sam Guevara's back was really, really welled up, and I hope that he's getting rest sometime soon. I don't know if that was because of what had happened in the street fight match, or if it was some other stuff, or if this was filmed prior to all this happening. On the live TV stuff, I have no idea, but I hope that his back gets healed up, because there's just a lot of welts and bruises that you could see. The match ends when Sammy Guevara hits the GTH to go to hospital. It's basically a GTS from the torture rack position, where he has him up in the back and just throws him up, knees him in the face, knocks him out. Very, very strong looking move. I think that it's a really good move. His 630 cannonball is also pretty good, but I can see why they don't use that as much anymore. It was Ricochet's finishing move. You don't want to copy. He's also trying to move in a more power heavy direction under the tutelage of Chris Jericho, so I can get where they're coming from. But the match was very good, probably my favorite of the entire show, and I'm going to give it a B grade as well. The next match was the final match of the night. It was the main event for Dynamite, for Dark rather, and it was Serpentico versus Darby Allin. The key to this match was the storyline being told between Taz and Darby Allin. I really have enjoyed what they've done with that. I don't like the way that Darby Allin lost to Cody. I don't think that was a smart booking decision. I think that if they were going to have him lose, they should have had him lose in a much better way. But the way that they did it, in my opinion, was just bullshit. I can't accept him losing in a way that's that dumb, where he hits his finishing move but loses. Like, what? There's no way he wouldn't have noticed that his shoulders were on the mat. There's no way that he wouldn't have noticed that he wasn't positioned properly on Cody to beat him. Like, I'm calling bullshit on that. He's not that inexperienced. He's not that in the moment kind of thing, like his head's out of the window or whatever. But I do like what they've done with him and Taz, and how Taz is sort of the guy who's like, listen, I could help you, and I'm telling you what's up. And he's like, dude, I already know all the stuff you're trying to tell me. It's cool. Back off. It's probably going to lead to a heel turn for Darby in the future, but I don't see him as the heel in this. I really don't. I think that he has a legitimate claim to saying, like, listen, you have no right to tell me what to do and what not to do in this. I know what I did wrong. What I did wrong was some bullshit, and I hate that I did it, but I know what I did wrong, and I know what I can do to fix it. But Taz does a pretty good job throughout all of this of continuing that side of the story. Serpentico never really has any main chances of winning this, as the entire show was pretty much squash matches from start to finish, which that happens when you have limited talent, sadly. And I'm not saying limited talent as in the people that they had were not talented, but limited as in the people that you have signed to your roster able to show up. But yeah, overall the match was pretty good. Darby did a lot of dirty tactics, like throwing Aubrey into Serpentico's way to get the advantage. Never did anything illegal in terms of like low blows or whatever, but he was acting a little bit less babyface-ish, I guess is the best way to put it. So Pentakill did start the match with some streamers, which I thought was pretty neat. But other than that, nothing of his really impressed me this time around. I've seen some matches of his before. I think he's a pretty good guy, and I think that this match in general did show a decent amount of him. But I was more focusing on the Darby stuff for this because Darby's my boy. He's probably my favorite sign to the AEW roster. Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. So he ends up winning the match with the Last Supper after hitting a coffin drop to the outside. And I like that he's using the Last Supper as his finishing move. I think that it's very deadly and could be a very good finisher in the coming years if he wants to keep with it. And it's much safer for him and overall better as a strategic move than the coffin drop is. So I do like that he's using the coffin drop less and less as a finishing move and more as a signature that he'll pull out when he wants to or needs to because the opponent is, not staying down. But the way that the Last Supper looks, it looks like it's a combination of a pin and a submission. So I would like to eventually see somebody tap to it before the 3 count. I think that would be pretty neat because it looks like he's got them in a very weird angle where their leg is just in a lot of pain and they're unable to kick out because of the pain that they're in. They're not thinking about that portion of it. This one was not a particularly well executed one. He was sort of positioned to the side, but it happens from time to time. That's what degraded this match a little bit. Even though it was, again, a clear squash match, it was a very good one that I thought had a lot of good storytelling to it outside of what was actually happening, and for that reason I gave it a B. I would have liked to have given it a B+, just for the storytelling aspects of it. It was the best in terms of moving forward with some sort of narrative on the entire card, and I thought that they did a very good job of that. The best match in terms of quality was definitely Alan Angels versus Sammy Guevara. So those two got a very similar grade for very different reasons. But I had to take points away from it because of the fact that it was a very sloppy finish. Not very, but could have been a better finish in terms of his Last Supper being off kilter. And because it is a squash match, I try not to give it too high of a grade. So the overall show for Dark was a C+ grade. It's fairly average, everything considered. I would like to see more from it in the future. It's not the best show that I've seen of theirs, but it was a very good one nonetheless, very entertaining. But there were 2 matches that I just wasn't really feeling or into, one of which I didn't take very many notes on because I just was bored throughout the majority of it. Sadly, Private Party and Ryan Rembrandt and Mike Reed were unable to really keep my focus into it, which is a shame because I do like all 4 of them. I've seen very good matches from them. So now we can move on to what happened on Dynamite this week. And the beginning segment was with Inner Circle, and they were arriving in a limo, basically. The highlight of this was that they basically were hyping everybody up for the main event, saying, listen, we're going to do something to the Elite that they've never seen coming. And Alex Marvez asks, so what is that? And Santana comes with a really great line. He's like, it's a surprise, pendejo, or it's a surprise, dumbass. And I really like that. Other than that, it's just sort of a way to get into the show. Nothing too big, nothing too fancy. I gave it a C grade. It's what it needed to be, but wasn't much more. It's not going to affect the overall grade of the show, though, because it was only a couple minutes long. Wasn't a very long promo. Wasn't one that, in my opinion, has a lot of bearing on the overarching themes of the show, and it wasn't particularly a segment, more so than it was just a hype package. And there's a difference between the two and how much I'll give grading points wise. The first match of the night was Jon Moxley versus 10, beginning with a promo by Brody Lee, which was not the best I've ever seen of his. He dispels the cult notion and does that in a very piss poor way. And that was intentional. They wanted you to see that they actually are more of a cult than he's letting on to believe. But they did come up with a few new things that happened with it. He introduced the High Knights of the Dark Order, which I would like to see becoming a thing where he has a couple of High Knights within his court or whatever. I think that could be pretty nice. I hope it wasn't just a throwaway line, but it was pretty good. He reiterates a lot of the same points and is basically just the Lions of AEW, we're the top of the food chain, and in order for me to prove that this is the truth, I have to, win this match to pay back the loyalty of my followers. It worked in terms of making me believe that he really thought he was going to win the match and that he needs to win it, but it didn't work in the fact that I think that putting that much pressure on yourself going into a title match is not a great idea, especially one that I don't think you're going to actually win. because then you put yourself in a bit of a corner of, okay, well, he either wins and Moxley loses his title in a very short manner, but this keeps Brody Lee and the Dark Order safe and they don't have to do any changing of the storyline there. Or it makes it so that he then has to find some way to weasel out of it and say, well, actually, this is what happened. They could find ways to do it. I have faith that they'll figure it out in some way, but I'm not a huge fan of that direction of it. I think that just the idea of him winning the title being the main goal and not him winning it because he has to prove something, I think that would have been better. Obviously, there would have been the smart fans who would have been like, well, he didn't win, so maybe his followers are going to have a little bit less loyalty to him because they're like, well, he just lost his undefeated streak against somebody. Maybe he's not as strong as we thought. So I can get where they're coming from, but I think it got too convoluted in terms of what the implications are for it. But we'll see where it goes. I'm not going to judge too soon. The match in general was pretty decent. 10 had a lot of really good moves. But Moxley was pretty much in charge the entire time, really outclassing him here, which is a shame because 10 was doing a pretty good job thus far of keeping up the mystique of a very good second in command, while Evil Uno was no longer able to fulfill that role. For the most part, though, the only thing that I can really say about this is that there was a scene near the very beginning of the match where Moxley gets thrown into the barricade that I'm kind of getting sick and tired of. There is an exception later on in the show that they do the same spot where Matt Hardy throws Sammy Guevara into the barricade, and that worked very well. But I do think that as an overall thing, I'm not a big fan of them continuing this spot in this particular instance. I don't know what it is about it, but I think I've gotten tired of that spot. Match was, pretty much all in Mox's favor. There was a nice ripcord cutter from 10 where it looked like he had some momentum going, but Mox shut that shit down with a paradigm shift. And then he sort of played with him a little bit to see if Brody Lee would come out. Eventually, once he finished the match, he continued this and took a chair, wrapped it around 10's arm, was going to break the arm, and was like, listen, if you don't come out and give me back my title, shit's going to go down. Brody Lee is basically like, we got to make sacrifices. Sorry, but I ain't giving you this title, but now you've made things personal for Saturday. Well, Mox doesn't care about that, and he breaks the arm anyway with the chair. It was a decent match. It was a squash match, though, so it's a C+. That's the best grade that I can give squash matches. But regardless of that, 10 was very good in this match. Mox was very good in this match. It gave the story a little bit of a boost in letting you know, well, this is where we're heading for it. It didn't make it so that Brody Lee looked weaker going into the fight. It made it look more so that he was a bit more of a cowardly heel, which is good because that's kind of what you want to have him be right now. Because even though he is a very good wrestler and you know that he has strength, when he loses to Mox, which is what I think will happen, it gives you more of a storyline reasoning for why he wasn't so keen to take him on head on. You know what I mean? So I think that that's pretty decent. Overall, C+, though, for that grade. So one of the things that I like to do with this is look where the commercial breaks were, because pacing on a show is also very important. And I'll mention at the very end why that was important to me, what it kind of impacted it had. So the next match was Marco Stunt versus MJF. And they both had the record showing only the 2020 stuff, so I thought that was a very fascinating thing. I don't know if they've been doing that more recently, and I've just missed it, if they did that for the rest of the night, and I just missed it for anything other than this match, but I just recognized it for this one in particular. I'm guessing because it makes MJF look better, because he has that one loss on his record that sort of stains it a little bit. Also makes Marco look a little bit better, because he has a lot more losses on his record. I don't quite know, but after MJF came out, they had the break, then Marco came out. And then after Marco came out, or during the process of that, they mentioned Shad Gaspard and his passing, and I'm going to do a I'm going to do a quick little, I guess, memorial talk about that real quick. Shad Gaspard was a guy that really got me into the concept of having a heavyweight and a more agile and high-flying kind of person as their tag team partner. Crime Time was really good at doing that role, where you had Shad basically being the hot tag for the smaller guy, beating down the big guys, and it really worked very well. I also saw it with Batista and Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero to a certain extent, and there's a few other groups like that. But Shad Gaspard and JTG with Crime Time were definitely the ones that really influenced my opinion on all that. I've lost my interest in the heavyweight wrestling where it's just a bunch of like power moves. It's not really as appealing to me as it used to be, but Shad Gaspard was the guy who I looked to as the inspiration in tag team wrestling for that, and still is one of the people who I consider to be the main inspiration for me thinking about that style of tag team wrestling in a positive light, for as long as I did and as long as I still kind of do in certain aspects. Beyond wrestling, though, the man was also just an insanely good dude. He stopped a robbery in Florida, apparently. Like, that's insane. And during this episode that did lead to his passing, he made sure that his son was saved before he was. And that just goes to show how selfless of a man he was. The world lost a very bright soul on the day that he passed, and we're lesser off for it. But I hope that he rests in peace, and I hope that his family is able to get the peace that they deserve. And yeah, it's a very hard time for all fans and friends of Shad during this. But with that being said, let's get back to the breakdown. And I think one of the good things that happened after they mentioned this is the match used a little bit of comedy to sort of lighten the mood. I don't know if it was on purpose that they did it this way in particular, or if it just happened to work out like that. But life has a funny way of being able to show you the sides of life that are not so happy or bright, and then being able to show you some happy or bright stuff that happens after that to remind you that there is light with darkness, there is good with bad, and not everything is just death. There is also life. You know what I mean? But yeah, so there was one spot in particular that I'm mentioning for this where Marco Stunt went to go for like a sunset flip, and MJF for a very long time looked like he was about to fall over. You could tell that he was joking around though, and he eventually just sort of like goes like that after it and picks up Marco and continues the beatdown. This was also sort of a glorified squash match, really building to the idea of MJF and Jungle Boy's match at Double or Nothing being mostly in MJF's favor. Marco did a pretty good job of doing his comeback. Like I said, he's just amazing at that. Even when it's a match that you know he has no real shot of winning, he can give you that little bit of a false hope at certain points. And I really hope that when they eventually get to the stage where they want to give him more of a spotlight, he can turn that into not just false hope, but actual hope, and you can actually see him winning against people you don't think he would. And not just in roll-up ways, but in actually beating them with some sort of finishing move kind of combination. So there's a lot of really good moves throughout it. I tried not to go into that whole breakdown of this right now, but the match itself was very good. Ends with a salt of the earth, though, after MJF basically says, "I'm done with this." Marco had another one of his really nice knee strikes. I think it knocked MJF into the corner. It might have also been his Houston Hangover style Hurricane Rana. I'm not entirely certain exactly what it was, but the salt of the earth put him away. He tapped out. Then there was a promo cut at the end of it where he hits him with the Dynamite doesn't ring. I'm not a big fan of the term rats that he uses for the women that follow him around, his entourage or whatever. I think that that's a bit outdated, and in general, I think that it's cheap heat for wrestlers to use that nowadays, that kind of very clearly misogynistic or homophobic or racist or whatever kind of terminology. I'm not a big fan of using that. Again, it's cheap heat for people like me who look at that as very deplorable in of its own way. I get where they're coming from when they do it. Sometimes it can be a good means, but MJF is much better than that. He's got other tools in his arsenal. He doesn't need to go into that bag of tricks. Same thing with Jake the Snake Roberts when he does some of his vile, reprehensible things. You don't need to do it in those manners, Jake. You're so much better than that. But I'll get off on the soapbox for that. The match in general is pretty decent. Like I said, it's a squash match, so I try not to give it too high of a grade. But because it was good, it did do a nice job telling the story that it needed to tell. It got people ready for the match at Double or Nothing, and it did more than it needed to in terms of a match between Marco Stunt and MJF. I gave it a B grade. I thought that it did a very good job in what it needed to do, and it excelled past what it was set out to be on paper. The next thing was a Jake the Snake Roberts and Arn Anderson interview, which then leads into my thoughts about Jake the Snake Roberts and how he interacts throughout this and what he's done in the past with the snake and all that. I think that there is a competing faction within AEW brass of people that like old school Southern style wrestling that has a little bit more of a bite to it with this in terms of how the bad guys act, and the more newer school style. I guess that's not particularly grammatically correct, but you get what I'm trying to say. Of like the luchador style, the Ring of Honor style that you'd see, Glory Road kind of stuff, the Kenny Omega kind of stuff. King's Road is what I meant to say, not Glory Road. But yeah, it has a bit of that competing faction stuff going on behind the scenes, I think, and this segment in particular shows the Southern wrestling style of it. There was a lot of old school nostalgia in this. You could tell that the idea of having an Arn Anderson versus Jake the Snake Roberts match was very high on a lot of people's radar back when those two were in their primes. I sadly did not grow up through all that, and I didn't get to see either of these guys through their primes. I didn't really watch a whole lot of their matches prior to seeing them in this either. I knew who they were, Arn Anderson being part of the Four Horsemen. I knew a little bit about that history. Jake the Snake Roberts being one of the best villains in WWE, WWF rather. It was such a key part of their upper card stuff. So I kind of got an idea of who they were, what they did, and all that. So I was prepared going into this kind of a thing, knowing what I was going to get from it. And for the most part, I think they did a very good job. I think that they turned the typical interview style on its head. Instead of seeing those people who go at each other at the end of it, they tried to do that, but then they stopped themselves. And instead of making their thing about those two and having a match between those two one more time kind of thing, which Jake kind of slipped in there as a possibility, possibly because he wants to have a match, possibly that was scripted. I don't know. It's one of those types of things where they've gotten so good at working in whether or not it's a fictional scripted thing or if it's somebody shooting from the hip and trying to get in a shoot match in. I don't quite know anymore from these things, which I think is a good sign of where the business is when people like me who look into this kind of stuff can't figure it out. I think that's pretty good. But as in general, I just liked the idea of them not overhyping a match between those two and having this go into, okay, well now there's more fuel to the fire for why these two guys as managers are going after each other. Jake Snake Roberts might not be going after Cody because Lance wants to. He might be going after Cody because he sees Arn there and he never got the chance to taint this babyface. He never got the chance to have his match against him. And with the history behind Jake the Snake Roberts, it makes a lot of sense. Really good long-term storytelling there in terms of looking at their pasts and using that for this present, and looking also towards the future to see what else you can do. However, I do hope that they both stay retired from entering competition and they don't try to have a match. That would be terrible. Anyway, until that happens, this gets a B grade. If it happens again, this grade immediately drops down to the D tier and possibly even an F, because it was the beginning of something that I definitely didn't want to have to see. Even if it is a good match between the two, I don't think that it's the right decision. But we'll see. Till then, it did good for what it needed to do in terms of Lance and Cody, and I hope that it continues to build up as time goes on. They also did a nice little bit of foreshadowing with his Jake Snake Roberts comments about Mike Tyson. I'm assuming Tyson will get involved in some way, shape, or form, either during the match or after the match. Mike Tyson's known in the wrestling business. No, that was Mr. T, actually. Maybe it was Mike Tyson. Whatever the case, there have been people, celebrity styles, who have been known for getting involved in matches. I hope that they don't go that route and they do a different swerve with Mike Tyson and not have it be one of those things where he, like a Drew Carey, interrupts in the match or whatever with a chair. I hate seeing stuff like that. It's one of the things that drew me away from WWE, and I would hate to see in AEW. But yeah, be great for that. There was a commercial break prior to this, by the way, just to make sure I mentioned that. So then right before the commercial break, for the next one, they did a nice little beautiful visual promo with Darby Allin, basically showing him winning the Casino Royale ladder match. Good Lord, that's a handful. And a mouthful, for that matter. And Darby Allin's promos are always visually stunning and beautiful. I absolutely love them. Whoever allows him or the crew that he works with to make those things as good as they are. They need to keep with that because it's so good. Oftentimes he puts like his opponents in masks on people's faces, and I think that that's just amazing that he's going to continue using that. I think it works very well for his character of having people that are very clearly not the ones that he's actually facing, but are representations of that. He had the body bag, for example, that he dragged behind in his car with Sammy Guevara. I thought that was great. It was actually behind his truck, rather, which is even more badass. Darby Allin, in general, just makes me very giddy. I love seeing his stuff. He's so young, too, so there's just so much more that I get to enjoy of his, and I'm very happy for that. I give a B grade for this because it was very small, but it was very, very good. But again, because of how short it was, I don't get to give it a very large impact on the overall grading of this episode. So then they had the commercial break, and when they came back, they had a Pac promo talking about why he wasn't there, why Rey Fenix is going to beat down Orange Cassidy, and the entire thing was just very beautiful visually. There's a lot of Easter eggs thrown in there too. Scenes of the Bastard Pac standing next to the more gentlemanly dressed up Pac. Things of that nature were really good. I really enjoy this character arc that Pac has been going through, and the different things that he does with his videos has also been very good. His promos have been top notch. I wish that he could come and wrestle more, but sadly, because of the current situation, he's still over in the UK and is not able to make it. Perhaps that'll change in more soon than later, but until then, these are very good ways of keeping him on the show in some way. It was a B minus rather, in terms of how I graded it, because it was very good, but it was very short, and it wasn't as good as the Darby Allin one, in my opinion, so I had to give it some sort of differentiation. So B minus grade was what I gave it, but because it was short, I'm going to tag that onto the next match that happened, Orange Cassidy versus Rey Fenix, which was unsurprisingly my favorite match of the night. So there was just a lot of really good comedy within this, and is also juxtaposed with the very hard-hitting style that Rey Fenix is known for nowadays. I cannot explain how much I love the way that they did this, because I'm not typically a fan of comedy in my wrestling. Colt Cabana is okay. I can leave or take him. I think that most comedy wrestlers, though, don't do it for me. I like to see a more sports-based competition between people, hard-hitting kind of stuff where you want to see athletes doing athletic things, or you want to see big brutes doing big brutish things, not in terms of throwing each other all around necessarily, but Tomohiro Ishii kind of things where he's just like throwing really stiff forearms at people's neck. I like that kind of stuff. I think that's more my style of wrestling. Okada versus Omega 4, for example, is a very good example of what my ideal best match is. But this match was definitely not that. This one had a lot of comedy thrown in, but Orange Cassidy has found a way to tie that into his style and make it more believable that he could actually win. And he's one of the very few comedy wrestlers that I look to and say, these guys got a very good thing going here. And I could see them being legitimate contenders for titles. Other people that I do like but don't think the exact same way about, they have their own niches, are like Gentleman Jervis. I think that he's very good. Orange Cassidy, of course, and Colt Cabana's got his own things. And I think that Martin Kirby, when he was still wrestling, was also very good at combining the comedy with an actual legitimate wrestling background. I'm not a huge fan of it for the most part, but he's done a very good job with it. Orange Cassidy, that is. The match begins basically with him dodging a kick from Rey Fenix. Like, you see that he's thinking, he remembers what happened and doesn't get caught with the same mistake twice. I think that that's really good. He's had matches against people like David Starr, Smiley Kylie Ray, and Gentleman Jervis himself even, that show this kind of, he's a thinking man's wrestler if you actually pay attention to it. And it's kind of like Toru Yano, where they take their comedy as a way to throw off their opponent, and then they use it as fodder for them being able to find the chinks in the armor and be able to win the match. So far, Cassidy hasn't really been able to show that side of him just yet because he's still learning everybody, I guess, in terms of like storyline wise. But once he figures out what people are like and he gets to face Pac again for another time or whatever, I think that you'll start to see him winning more matches than losing, and you're going to be quite surprised at how he does it. But this match in general was very good. It had a half comedic approach to it, half typical wrestling approach to it, where Cassidy would occasionally do things like really slow dodges or continue wrestling with his hands in his pockets that I think was really good. I think they did a very good balance of it with this match. I would go over everything in this match because it was my favorite. I took so many notes on it, but I will go over just sort of like the highlights of it because we're already approaching the 50-minute mark and I'm only halfway through this episode of Dynamite. So he hit him with a Superman punch, and his Superman punch is one of the best in the business. I don't know what it is, but it gives me a pop every time. I guess it's because I've seen the Superman punch typically only thrown by people like Roman Reigns, who I'm not able to get behind. And when Cassidy does it, I'm able to get behind him a bit more because I like him a bit more. And so when he hits somebody with it, it's always just a very awesome moment. It could also be due to the fact that he's a bit more of a skinny guy in terms of his build. I know that he's also very muscular from the training that he has to do. I get that. But when you've got somebody like Roman Reigns who's very big in terms of muscularity, and he's a bit more like lean in terms of muscularity, it perhaps gives it a different look when you see somebody throwing a Superman punch like that. But whatever the case it is, I really like that. I've just rambled on about a Superman punch for about a minute, but you get what I'm trying to say. There was a decent amount of really good moves throughout. DDTs, like a tilt-a-whirl DDT from around the world, a diving DDT that he typically does that either leads into the sloth splash or could eventually lead into the rat trap and give OC the win. Stuff like that's really good, and I thought that he did a very good job. Phoenix did a very good job selling it. He got out of the Black Fire Driver at one point with a cradle, like a small package basically, and that was really neat. But then Kip Sabian came out, and this is where the match sort of took a turn for the worse, in my opinion. I wasn't a big fan of this, and I get why they did it, but it was very lazy booking, in my opinion. I'm not sure why, in general, anyone continues to use this method, other than, I guess, the fact that it gets people involved. But Kip Sabian costs OC the match, low blow to him, he gets hit with a cutter, and then things go out of control and spiral from there, with everybody who's in the match confirmed and some of their allies coming to basically join into a dog pile. Topes all over the place, people doing acai moonsaults, and I feel like a lot of people could have possibly gotten injured from this. Phoenix got hurt for certain. He's probably okay. We don't quite know at this moment what happened there, but just it isn't in general. It didn't look very good because people kept banging their knees against the barricade or not being caught properly or overshooting or whatever. It worried me a great deal. So I originally had this as an A grade with the promo and the match because the match was very good and the promo just sort of added a little bit more to it. But because of that ending, I had to jump it down a little bit, and it's an A minus. Phoenix got the win with the Blackfire Driver. Sorry, no, he didn't get it with the Blackfire Driver. He got it with a cutter. My apologies. But OC, through this match, proves to me that if they wanted to, they could actually make him a serious contender for the title sometime. Never against somebody like Moxley or Brody Lee, but I could see him even being somebody like Kenny Omega or Hangman Adam Page. Somebody who he could find ways to really get under their skin and make them make mistakes, and when they make those mistakes, find ways to capitalize. Kind of how he did against David Starr, who is clearly the superior wrestler to him in terms of style and technique, but he was the superior wrestler in terms of being able to outthink them. Somebody like a Moxley or Brody Lee would just use their strength and their brute determination to beat him, which is where he lost against Pac, because brute strength and brute determination. Anyway, match was pretty decent, A minus for it all considered. The next match was Chris Statlander and Hikaru Shida versus Britt Baker, DMD, and Nyla Rose. And this match originally was something that I criticized a lot in the first time that I did this, and I will still continue to criticize it in this version of it as well. However, there is something more important at hand here, and that's Britt Baker's injury. It looks like she might be out for 6 to 9 months with a torn ACL or MCL or something like that after this match. That is still rumors at the point of me making this video, but she might not be able to make it to Double or Nothing at all. I'm still going to assume that she does make it to Double or Nothing for my predictions at the end of this video, but I hope that she's okay in the end. Same for Rey Fenix and same for Matt Jackson, who also were injured during the filming of this episode. But this match was pretty decent. Nyla came out with the kendo stick, probably the one that she hit Shida with. Might even be Shida's that she lost, quote unquote. I have no idea what that storyline is, if they're going to come back to it or what. But her entrance music has some new parts to it, I think. Either that or I just started listening to it more clearly than I have in the past. But she has a more primal yell at the very beginning. It's always been a primal yell, but I feel like this is a changed one. And then there's lyrics throughout it now as well that I don't think were there before. And I think that it's pretty good. And her coming out actually made me realize that I kind of miss Nyla Rose on TV. I was never a huge fan of hers to begin with. I didn't think that taking the belt off of Riho was quite right just yet. I understand why they did it, and I think that Nyla is a decent champion after this match in particular, and how they did it. I disagree with some of the booking decisions with it and how that went down, but in general, the match itself was helpful in getting me to realize why Nyla Rose is the champion, why it was a good decision, and helped me get behind her a little bit more. Her stuff on Road to has been very helpful in that regards as well. She's becoming more and more like a babyface to me than a heel, though, which is very interesting considering she's supposed to be like the top heel of the company at the moment. The match in general, though, was, sort of typical female tag team stuff from AEW. You have a bit of a scuffle. You have people going after each other one-on-one individually kind of stuff. But there was a couple of really neat things. Britt Baker not wanting to get into the match for a while, eventually being dragged in. Nyla Rose basically having to take control after the injury to Britt Baker, and then possibly changing the match's ending on the fly. Also was a very interesting move. I think what ended up getting Britt hurt was there was like a Death Valley driver into the corner with her position there. Nyla landed on her and possibly landed on the leg in a very bad way. It was around then that she stopped wrestling the match for the most part and was just sort of off in the corner. I thought it was a heel tactic where she was telling the doctor to come over and talk with her and basically make it look like she was hurt, but it turns out that she actually was hurt, and they had to sort of do things on the fly, I'm guessing. But the way that they ended it was not particularly great, so it looked like the babyfaces were going to get the win. That's when the tides are about to turn. Nyla's going to overpower them with her brute strength, and that's exactly what happened. But she hits the Beast Bomb on Shida and gets the pin on Shida with only one Beast Bomb. I would have preferred they did it with Statlander. I think that would have been a much better ending. Statlander, for the most part, had been the one being beaten up in the match. One Beast Bomb on her would have made sense. I understand that they had a match already where it took a couple of Beast Bombs, one of which was off the turnbuckle, to put her away. But I think that thematically with this match, it would have made more sense. And leading into Double or Nothing, you don't want the champion pinning the challenger, because then that doesn't really give you as much of a reason to watch that match. So I think that was a bit of a misstep, but they sort of came back a little bit with it and gave you the idea of, okay, well, maybe it's not what we thought it was. We have the fact that Shida throughout the entire match was taking it to her and Britt pretty handily. She was actually the star of her tag team, which is surprising because Statlander, being how powerful and amazing she has been thus far, you would have thought would be a bit more on equal footing, but no, Shida really took over in this match for her team, in my opinion. And then at the end of the match, instead of being put through the table, she puts Nyla through the table for the Turnabout is Fair Play spot. Overall, though, the match was very sloppy. There was a lot of missteps and miscues. There was also apparently the injury. So sadly, I have to give the match a B-. It was fun. I enjoyed it. But as in general, their wrestling matches for the women have never been top-notch, in my opinion. They're still working on that aspect of it. The best match thus far in that division has been Riho versus Nyla Rose in the second match that they had, where Nyla won the championship. Prior to that and after that, they've never really had a consistently good match. Possibly Shida versus Abaddon, I think, was pretty decent. Shida's been very good on her own. in terms of her matches. She hasn't had a lot of slip-ups, knock on wood. But Statlander seems to always find some instances where something happens. Her match against Nyla Rose, obviously she had the flu, so I can't really blame her too much, but there was a lot of miscues and things of that nature. In this match, there was a couple things. She missed an enziguri, but still got the tag off. Things like that, and it's happened with a lot of the wrestlers. Britt Baker, Hikaru Shida, and Nyla Rose, for the most part, have been very good since the company started. Nyla Rose had one misstep in her match against her match against Riho, the first one that they had. In that, I didn't think strategically made any sense for the chair spot. There also were a couple of mistakes there throughout the duration of that match, but it was still pretty decent. But yeah, it's one of the things that they need to work on. I really love the women that they have in their division. I think that they have a good chance to shine, and there are definitely things that are bright spots for them. That's why I gave it a B-, because even though it was sloppy, the match told a good story. It put me on the mood for watching those two matches, should they eventually happen. I'm not entirely certain if Britt Baker will be there or not, as I mentioned. But for the most part, if they can just tune it up a little bit better and not have as many missteps, it will be a very good division, because the women that they have are genuinely amazing when they are on their game. So I'll move on past that. There was an interview with Jon Moxley after everything happened with his match with 10 and Brody Lee hanging out. He made a line about the creepy gimp masks on the Dark Order men, and he was just very pissed off in general. He talked about the idea of life being violence and an escalation of violence. So, move your car. No, I'm not going to move my car. Well, I'm going to get it towed. Well, I'm going to fight you for it. Well, okay, let's go at it. And then they fight, and he continued on with a couple more examples of that. I thought that was pretty good. Not one of his best promos, though. I think he's done much better in the past. So I gave it a B grade. I think it was decent for what it was. But again, because it was short, not going to be super effective on the end result of all this. I tell you these things, though, just so you know where my head is at for all of the promos and what I thought of them. There was a commercial break after that, and when they came back, they went to the Sean Spears news segment, which was probably one of my favorite promos throughout the entire night. And that's saying a lot, because there was the Pac promo, which I thought was really good, and the Darby Allin promo, which I thought was really good. This match, the setup for a match between Dustin Rhodes and Sean Spears, which is one of the reasons why it got such a higher grade in comparison to those two, even though it was marginally better than them, in my opinion. It was very good and probably was the best promo on the show for my money, but for the most part, it got the better grade because of the fact that it set up a match, because it did something more than just tease something that's happening that night or tease something that was already booked. It's setting up something completely different. Obviously, Sean Spears hasn't gotten over the whole Cody thing. I think that that's smart. He hasn't had any chance to find a tag team partner just yet. So since he's not going to go after Moxley, he's not going to go after Lance Archer or possibly the champion who wins the TNT, which is likely going to be Archer. It looks like he wants to continue going after Cody, who I think will lose that TNT championship match. And I'll get to all the predictions and why later in a few minutes, actually, when I finish with this. But yeah, for the most part, it seems like he hasn't gotten over that, and he's going after Dustin as his means to getting at Cody eventually. He had a really killer line, which is one of the good things that I think comes from Southern style wrestling if you do it right. Southern American, as in like Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, that kind of Southern America wrestling, if you know what I mean. Not like Brazil, South America wrestling. Different story. But yeah, this season in general was very good. They had like one portion of it when he was talking about the match with Dustin Rhodes, where it looked like sort of like a hardball with Chris. Who is it? I can't remember the guy's name, but it was like a hardball camera angle from CNN, and I thought that was really interesting. It was like, oh, they're making fun of CNN with SSN. Like, obviously, there's they're playing on letters there, playing on abbreviations there, and it was a new segment, obviously. So, like, there's a lot that went into it. I thought it was very smart, and doing the different camera angles from a videography perspective is also very nice. So as in general, for this particular promo, I thought that it did a very good job. I gave it an A- grade because it was better at doing something fresh and new that we didn't know about, and it looked very good visually, in my opinion. So A- grade for that one. Because it was on the longer end, I do give this one a bit more of a influencing factor on the overall grade. So that is something to keep in mind for my final grade of the show. Then they had an announcement for the matches at Double or Nothing, now adding on that Shawn Spears Dustin Rhodes match. They talk about the Battle Royale next week for the number one contendership for the TNT title. My money is on Darby Allin losing the Casino Battle Royale ladder match thing, but winning that Battle Royale for the TNT title on Dynamite. That's where my money is right now, but we'll see. But I think that would be really good to see who eventually will be the next victim for Lance Archer. Could be a lot of fun. So then the final match of the night, the main event, Matt Hardy versus Sammy Guevara. It's very clear that Damascus is a much more violent form of the broken Matt Hardy character, and I really like that. A lot of biting, a lot of scratching, a lot of really hard shots. The delete of head smashing against the turnbuckle from the top turnbuckle to the middle turnbuckle to the bottom turnbuckle. I don't know if he did that before. I didn't watch a lot of his singles matches or any of his broken Matt Hardy matches other than the deletions. So it very well could have been something he did with his other entities within the vessel of Matt Hardy. I don't quite know. But as in general, this match was very good. I'm using this phrase as in general, which is grammatically incorrect, but words are becoming difficult. So I've been talking for an hour, and this is now the 4th hour of me talking about this, so I apologize if there's any sort of like weirdness going on with it. But yes, so they eventually went to a commercial break throughout the match, but they didn't have a picture-in-picture for this. It was actually before the match, and when Sammy came out, I figured they were going to do picture-in-picture with him doing the card stuff. He didn't do it. I'm assuming that if he did it, it would have been visible on Fight TV. So hopefully if he did do it, people got to see that. And he said something dumb or stupid for getting ready for Double or Nothing, as he typically does. I don't know if he still does that anymore, to be quite honest with you. But I really liked that miniature gag gimmick, I guess. I thought it was pretty good. They mentioned throughout it that Matt Hardy has 27 years of experience, and Sammy Guevara is only 26. I thought that was a very fascinating thing. And it really just goes to show how good Sammy Guevara is at such a young age. He sells like a motherfucker, and he also hits moves so well. One of the things that he sold very well in this match in particular were the 3 Twist of Fates that he took. In fact, it was technically 4 in total, because he took one, got out of it, took another one, got pinned for a 2 count, took another one, and rolled out of the ring from it, and then took a 3rd one, which ended up finishing him off for the match. But all of them he just sold really well. The one that he got out of was through a headstand that looked like he sold it in the typical way of how he does sell that move. So it was really cool. There was a few other things that happened throughout the match. Matt Hardy did a lot of beating down on Sammy Guevara. Then they went to picture-in-picture for another break. And throughout that, basically the things that Matt Hardy had been doing to Sammy Guevara were returned to him, with Sammy doing the same things to Matt Hardy, which I thought was very good storytelling throughout the match. Even if it was in picture-in-picture, I thought that they did a very good job with that. But of course, the match ends with the Twist of Fate. And one of the things that I didn't like about this match, and it's sort of something I'm starting to see a little bit in AEW in general, is they have a tendency to do more of a WWE style. One of the main things being that large brawl for the Casino ladder match with the Orange Cassidy and Phoenix match. I don't like that kind of booking. It's just not my style. It's what I moved away from, and they can do it so much better, and they have done so much better. They need to stick to their guns, stick to their uniqueness, and not do such cliched stuff. Some of the camera angles in this match reminded me of WWE camera angles, And to a certain extent, it wasn't in a bad way, because WWE does things that are very good in terms of how they shoot their matches. They do things that are pretty good sometimes when they book a match in how it flows. And I think that in this case, for this match, things that I saw that were more WWE-esque were the good things, but I do worry that translates eventually into, when we see things that are more like the American style, it will just be WWE style and not its own style, or even an indie American style, or preferably, like I said, its own AEW American style, where it sets everything apart. They've not done that too much, but it is a thing that I've began noticing with this episode in particular, that I'm going to keep my eye out on, and I hope that they don't continue going down that path. Maybe I'm being a bit too critical here. For the most part, I try to be as generous as I can be with things like this, because I do like the show, but I do realize that my biases in that regards make me feel like I have to overcompensate a little bit, so perhaps that's part of it as well. Whatever the case, Matt Hardy wins with a twist of fate, and he goes to attack Sammy Guevara after the match, picking up a chair in a very weird way. I can't really explain it better than that. It was just very odd the way that he picked up the chair. But then the Inner Circle has Kenny Omega, and they're basically like, hey, you better come get your boy, or else you're going to be the only person at the Stadium Stampede match on Saturday. And Matt Hardy goes chasing after it and tries to help out. But prior to him being able to get there, the Young Bucks come back. And I think that's where Matt Jackson got injured, is when he jumps off of, it was basically a barricade in the stadium, onto either Ortiz or Santana. I can't remember at the exact moment which one it was that he hit. I think that Santana got hit by Nick, but I could be wrong. Either way, I think that Nick was wearing a face mask. They might have both been wearing face masks, but I know that Nick wasn't for certain, because I saw that. But when he came down, it looked like he might have bruised his ribs or something of that nature. I don't quite know what has happened. I haven't checked any of the things since recording this, obviously, and prior to that I hadn't seen any new updates. So hopefully he is okay as well. But so now they have a 4-on-4 advantage, where you have Kenny Omega. Matt Hardy eventually joins into the fray, and it looks like they're going to be able to, stem the tide a little bit. But of course, one of those four for the Inner Circle is Jake Hager, and he turns the tide back in the Inner Circle's favor. And then come barreling down from the 100-yard line on the other side. I know there's not a 100-yard line, but it was a 100-yard dash, basically, is Hangman Adam Page. And I popped harder for this than I popped for things in a long time. I've missed that man so much, and I'm glad that he's back for Double or Nothing, even if it is only for one show, and he's going to go back to the quarantine life after that. I really hope that the storyline is able to be told and not rushed, because people are starting to get antsy or whatever with it. But it is nice to see both the Young Bucks and Hangman back for Double or Nothing. It did worry me. JR mentioned it in the match, and was something that I never really thought about, but like, what happens if they didn't come back? What happens if they didn't get the chance to show? Would it just be a forfeit? Would they have to find some other means of going about it? Obviously, they wouldn't book a match like that if they didn't have them booked for it. But just from a storyline perspective of thinking like what they've done thus far, it was a very good measure. And when you're suspending disbelief for stuff like this, you are able to sort of put yourself in that mindset sometimes, which I think was pretty good. There were things that Hangman did where it really showed his Virginian in him. So he went like, "Go on, get," as the Inner Circle were running away, which I thought was pretty good. There was just a lot of cool stuff like that, little nuggets of information you could pick out from the brawl itself. As an overall, for the most part, I think that this was a very good segment to end off the show, and it really added to the match. The match itself was probably a B grade, but I bumped it up a grade level for the ending portion of it, so I give it a B+. And I think that match was a very good finisher. Obviously, I don't think it was as good as the OC Phoenix match, but it's okay to have one of those matches in the middle of your card where you can say, yes, this was a better match than the finale, but it kept me around to that point. So regardless, I think that they've done a very good job preparing us for Double or Nothing with these. So the show as a whole was very good. I think that everything that happened served a purpose in some manner or another, fueled storylines that have already existed, and prepared us for Double or Nothing pretty well. Very good go-home show. I gave it a B+. Again, the women sort of disappointed me in their match. There was an injury too, possibly, so there's just a lot of bad stuff happening with that. It's a shame because I really like the division and hope it can do much better, but it hasn't really impressed enough yet for me. Each individual has done things that have been impressive, but the matches themselves have not been the thing that has impressed. It's been the character work that they've done in those matches, which in some extent is okay, but if the wrestling quality itself isn't very consistently good, there's only so much character work can do. That's one of the reasons why I don't like Luther. The character work is pretty decent in him. I like where they're going with his character. I want to see more from it and see where it goes, but the in-ring work so far hasn't been enough to keep me invested in his character to the point where it overshadows it, I guess. So B+ grade for Dynamite, C+ grade for Dark. Now we're going to go to my predictions for Double or Nothing, and I'm just going to go down the line of matches that I have here. I did it last time in order of where I thought that they would be booked in the match, but we're already an hour and 15 in, and I'm kind of getting tired of talking about the same topic again for now going on 4.5 hours. So I apologize. In the future, this will not be a problem. I think that I will be doing this a little bit more frequently, and we'll be able to get the hang of it so that it's a bit shorter in the future. So the first match I have on here is Moxley versus Brody Lee. I'm fairly certain Moxley's going to win that match. That is my prediction. So Mox being pissed off really helps him out. Brody Lee putting a lot of pressure on himself really hurts him. I think it's a fairly obvious thing to say that Moxley is not going to lose his title anytime soon because he is such a fresh champion, and I don't see a reason to lose the title just yet. I kind of want to see him drop the belt to Hangman Page, to be quite fair with you. Kenny Omega would also be another good target for that, in my opinion. Even Darby Allin would be a pretty good option. But Brody Lee is not the guy to take the title from him yet. I'm not entirely certain if it will be a clean victory. It might be one of those where he wins by disqualification or something. But I do think that Moxley will retain the title in some manner, and I think he will win to retain the title. So that is my prediction. Next match is Chris Statlander versus Britt Baker. If it happens, which I'm not entirely certain, but if it happens, I think that Britt Baker would have been slated to win and would win in this scenario because not much really was done on Dynamite in terms of their storyline, partially because she got injured, I think. But Britt Baker seems to have the jump on Statlander. She seems to be outthinking her, and typically when you have a heel that can outthink the babyface, the heel finds a way to win. So Britt Baker would have been my choice for that if that match happens. Hopefully, if it does happen, she stays safe, and if it doesn't happen, that she recovers as well as she can. Next match being Nyla Rose versus Hikaru Shida. Nyla just sort of got the title recently. I don't see her losing it soonish. I think she would be a bit of a longer champion reigning-wise than Riho was. And while Shida would have been my pick to take the title from her, after watching this Dynamite, I'm still of the opinion that she's still too young of a champion in terms of her reign, not in terms of her actual age. So I think that Nyla Rose will continue to be the champion for a little while longer. It was a difficult one to predict. I think that it's probably my least confident pick, other than the Casino ladder match because of how many people are in that one. But it is the one that I think has the best chance of being correct for my least confident picks, if that makes any sense. The Casino ladder match, I'm not entirely certain how that's going to go down. There's still the mystery entrant to be sorted out, so I'm going to do 2 predictions, one for the mystery entrant and one for the winner of the match. I'm leaning in the direction of it being a new person, so quite possibly we could see Woo You Know It Zack Ryder. I've also considered seeing people like Rusev or Drew Gulak, who's not on a NDNA or whatever. I don't think NDNA is what I'm trying to say. New Complete Clause. no compete clause is the word I was looking for. I could also see somebody from the Indies, somebody like I don't know. We could even see Jeff Cobb, for example. But my main guess is that it's either going to be Zack Ryder if it's a new guy, or it could be the loser of the MJF versus Jungle Boy match, or it could be MJF in general, and he just finds a way into it. But in terms of my guess, I'm going to go with Zack Ryder. I think that that's the most logical, most likely scenario. Another good guess would have been Joey Janela. I think that he could possibly be a good one, but I'm going to stick with Zack Ryder. That's the person that I had originally thought of. It very well could be wrong just because I don't know what his compete clause looks like, if he's able to compete right now, if it's still unable to, and that could make me look like a right fool if I don't know that and I'm giving this guess and it turns out that he can't do that. But regardless, I'm going to have him as my pick, and I'll deal with the consequences thereof. As for the winner of the match, I'm leaning heavily towards Scorpio Sky or Phoenix, more so heavily towards Phoenix. So Phoenix will be my pick. So I would not be surprised to see Chris Daniels also in the slot. There's so many people that it could be for the surprise entrant, but my pick for the winner, Phoenix. My pick for the surprise slot, Zack Ryder, who would not win the match, but would put on a very good showing if he was there. Next match is Shawn Spears versus Dustin Rhodes, and this is a match that Shawn Spears pretty much needs to win. I don't see a reason for him losing to Dustin Rhodes. It gives the storyline between Shawn Spears and Cody a little bit more fuel to the fire, so that they can have a Shawn Spears Cody 2 and have that lead up to some sort of major match between the two of them. Since we're still waiting on Blood and Guts to be a thing, I think that that's a very good direction to go, having Cody feuding with Shawn Spears again, and this time giving Shawn Spears the win I think would be very smart. Even though Cody is very good, and giving him more wins than losses would be smart, he can take the losses, if that makes sense. Shawn Spears cannot. He needs to win nowadays to regain some credibility. So I think that he will beat Dustin Rhodes, and I think that Shawn Spears will then go on to face Cody. So then Cody versus Lance Archer, because I think that Cody's going to be going up against Shawn Spears next, I think Lance Archer will win. It's also Lance Archer. I don't see him losing for a little while now. And I think that he would be a much better champion in terms of storylines that could come out of that. In terms of money-making potential, Cody definitely would be the pick, and if TNT created the title purely to give it to Cody, then they're going to give it to Cody. But I have more faith than everything being revolving around how much money they're going to make from it. I think that the stories that they're telling are more important than that, and that they're able to sell that to TNT with the fact that they're doing very good business against a company that is known for solely going for the things that make them the money, and who have consistently been going downhill in terms of viewer ratings for their main shows. So I think Lance Archer will be the champion for that. I think that something that might play into it, though, is Mike Tyson gets involved in some manner, either before or after the match, maybe even during it. And I think that that could be an interesting little knot to it all. But I do think that Lance Archer still wins regardless. MJF versus Jungle Boy, I'm leaning heavily towards MJF. If MJF becomes the surprise entrant, it's because he loses this match, and one of the added stipulations to it is whoever wins it gets an immediate title shot at their choosing, and whoever loses it gets the entry into the Casino Battle Royale. I think that that'd be a very interesting stipulation, since the match was sort of called out of the blue. I can't imagine why it couldn't also have a stipulation called out of the blue. It might not be the best booking decision overall, but I do think it would be an interesting one. But regardless, I think that MJF will win this match and continue to build the momentum that he's gained thus far. Then there's the Stadium Stampede match, and I'm fairly certain that that one's going to go to the Inner Circle. The Elite is nowhere near together just yet, and since they have Matt Hardy on their team instead of Cody Rhodes, I think that that's going to play a big part into it as well. Since Matt Jackson is also injured now, possibly, I think that he might be taken out of action for a little bit of it, and since Hangman is just nowhere to be seen right now in terms of his connection with them, I think that even though he's a very good wrestler, even though he and Kenny have decent chemistry, regardless of the fact that they're not working on the same page as much anymore, I think that the cohesiveness of the Inner Circle will be shown. So I think the Inner Circle will win. There's also the possibility that this is the first chink in the armor that they find in the Inner Circle, the first weakness that they point out, and leads to the eventual dissolution of it. But I don't know if we're quite there for that yet, if the Inner Circle is going to be dissolved anytime soon. But when it does, I definitely see it being Sammy Guevara turning on Chris Jericho, with his boys in Proud and Powerful, helping him out. Private Party versus the Best Friends, which is where the Freudian slip came in, will be on the pre-show, and I'm almost certain the Best Friends will be the number one contenders. There's a good story to be made for the Private Party because their interactions with Hangman have been pretty interesting, but Best Friends would just be an overall better match. Best Friends have had a lot more time on TV. Best Friends in general would just be more credible challengers, in my opinion. That's not to say Private Party wouldn't be credible challengers. They beat the Young Bucks after all. But Private Party still needs a little bit of time before I put them in the actual spotlight for the Tag Team Championships. And I think that putting them up against either the Lucha Bros or the Young Bucks would be a very good match for when that eventually comes down to it. So yeah, my overall predictions: Moxley wins his match. Britt Baker wins her match if she actually has it. Nyla Rose wins her match and retains. The Casino Ladder match would be won by Phoenix with Woo Woo, you know it, Zack Ryder as the surprise entrant. Sean Spears winning his match. Lance Archer winning his match. MJF winning his match. The Stadium Stampede going to the Inner Circle. And Best Friends winning the number one contendership on the pre-show. Anyway, that is all that I have to say about AEW now. We shall see what happens on Double or Nothing tomorrow night, and I'll let you guys know what happens, give my ratings on all the matches and how everything went down, and we shall certainly see how well I did, I guess, in my first ever prediction. Anyway, my name's the Jack Number 13. Thank you for joining me for this practically hour and a half episode of me talking about wrestling. There's a lot of rambling, a lot of ranting. Hopefully in the future we'll have it be a little bit more concise, but y'all know me, I'm still the same MG. Anyway, I'm signing out. Catch you guys next time.